What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel for another review. Today we are talking about a film that made it into my honorable mentions in my list of my top 10 most anticipated films of the year, and that is Wolfman, an R-rated retelling of a classic monster story. Look, there's been a lot of chatter about this movie on the internet for months prior to its release, even before the trailer was dropped when they first revealed what the design of the Wolfman would look like. And I was ready to defend this movie from day one. Even when we saw that design, I was like, well, let's just have a little faith, people. Let's just realize that in the actual movie, we're probably going to get a much more refined version of that design. And what we're looking at is really more of a cheap Spirit Halloween version, so to speak. Then the first trailer dropped, and I'll stand with you guys and say that the trailer didn't do much for me, but it's really tough with modern movie trailers because oftentimes you'll get incredible trailers for movies that are actually shit, and you'll get bad trailers for movies that actually turn out to be really good. So you can't really judge a film by its trailer as well as you used to be able to. And I'm sure many people saw that this was getting a January release and automatically assumed that it was going to be trash just on that notion, because January tends to be the month where studios drop their horror films that they're not very confident in, both critically or financially. But this film is directed by Leigh Whannell, who, if you ask me, has not missed yet. In the early days of his career, he co-wrote the first Saw with James Wan, which obviously spawned a massive franchise. Then he went on to do one of the Insidious sequels, which I thought was actually kind of decent, even though it's not generally loved by the critics. Then came Upgrade, a hyper-stylized action science fiction film that I still think is very underrated. If you haven't seen that, I suggest you check it out. But then he made what I think is his magnum opus, and that is The Invisible Man, which, like Wolfman, was meant to be a reimagining of a classic character. And that brings us to a nice segue into the film that we're here to talk about today, and that is Wolfman, which stars Christopher Abbott as Blake and Julia Garner as Charlotte. We follow this husband and wife duo as they go on a road trip deep into the Oregon country with their daughter Ginger to visit Blake's childhood home after his father's passing. Much in the same way that The Invisible Man was a fresh new take on the Invisible Man character, Leigh Whannell has been very transparent about the fact that he wanted this film to be a bold new take on the Wolfman concept. And in some ways it is. Lycanthropy in this film is treated less like a curse and more like a disease that slowly chips away at its host as they succumb and slowly transform. And that brings me nicely into my positives when it comes to this film. Something that we see in Wolfman that I think is very original and hasn't exactly been shown to us this explicitly in other werewolf type films is that we actually see the world from Blake's POV as he's starting to transform. We see how he perceives the world and how that itself changes over the course of his transformation. Whannell does this really cool thing where he'll show something from the POV, from the angle of one group of characters, and then he'll do a 180 pan to show from Blake's POV, and in doing so, the lighting gets darker, the sounds are distorted, there's some other visual stuff going on that I thought was really interesting. Even if it didn't all work for me, it was definitely original and something I've never seen before. He also does this cool but simple trick that actually worked pretty well for me, and that's when Blake starts to contort or he tilts his body, the camera will tilt with him. It's very disorienting in a good way. Also, I have to respect that they used mostly practical effects during the transformation sequences, and you can really tell too with some of the close-ups that you're looking at real physical props that have these movements that you're like, oh wow, they put genuine work into this stuff. And look, there's nothing in here that's going to top the transformations from An American Werewolf in London or The Howling and many other classics that are out there, but it was well made. There are a few distinct moments that have some pretty gnarly gore, but I think they show just enough gore to freak you out without it being overboard. And I do want to touch on the final Wolfman form one more time. Personally, I think people exaggerated just how bad the final form would look, especially when that design was first revealed long before the first trailer even came out. There's a lot more man in this Wolfman than there is wolf, and some people will definitely see that as a turnoff. I'm kind of indifferent towards it. It truly pains me to say this, but the problem with this movie is that the script is simply not good. It opens with a flashback sequence that sets up the film's excruciatingly unsubtle allegory for generational trauma that the Wolfman represents. And I get it, metaphors are ingrained in horror. I love to see them when they're used correctly, but when it's this heavy-handed, it feels more like you're being belittled. It's like the filmmakers don't think you'll get it, so they spell it out for you. And actually, that's a recurring thing that is used throughout this movie in terms of its story. There are so many instances of characters flat out telling us what emotions they're feeling, telling us what emotions other characters are feeling. Overall, some pretty bottom-tier dialogue. I do think Christopher Abbott is solid. He's not given much to work with when it comes to the dialogue. However, as the movie progresses, I think his performance gets infinitely better. I like how underneath all of that makeup, as he continues to mutate further and further, you still see this internal struggle within him, the man versus beast mentality. I think it takes a pretty strong actor to actually make you feel anything, especially when the setup was so poor, and I think he did a solid job with it. Unfortunately, I think this movie absolutely wastes Julia Garner. Her character is literally just the wife. There's like no depth to her whatsoever. And it feels like she has like 15 lines in the entire movie. And sure, I definitely think the writing deserves more blame for that than Garner herself as an actress, but she truly had the same expressionless look on her face throughout the entire film. Wolfman also commits one of the dirtiest sins that I can ever mention, in that it's boring. This is only like an hour and 40 minutes, and most of it is a build-up to a payoff that I felt was underwhelming and just weak overall. Whannell has talked about how inspired he was by David Cronenberg's The Fly when he made this, and I think he means that both in the body horror as well as the tragic circumstances surrounding the lead character. But if you're gonna go that route, you have to get me to care about these characters, and I just didn't. The setup was too weak. I haven't even mentioned the daughter yet, who was quite annoying. I hate criticizing child actors because it's difficult to find ones that are able to genuinely sell you on their performance, on their character. So in the end, I think Wolfman has some great body horror when it does go that route. The practical effects stand out as excellent, and I think Leigh Whannell still shows a lot of promise behind the camera. This doesn't like tarnish his reputation or anything for me, but it is by far his weakest film, and the dull, uninteresting story drags it right down. This is the first big disappointment of 2025. I'm gonna give Wolfman 2 stars. Well, that's unfortunate, and as I'm looking at the Rotten Tomatoes score, it looks like critics are pretty divided on this one, so that makes this one of those videos in which I'm very curious to hear what the horror community has to say about this. So if you do see Wolfman, be sure to drop down into the comments, let me know what you think of it, and tell me, what's your favorite werewolf movie? Hit that like button and subscribe before you head out if you want to see more content like this. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.